Today on The State of Us, 5 ways small business is impacted by high energy costs. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at an article from the Wall Street Journal entitled 5 Lessons in High Energy Costs. From gasoline to electricity, propane to fertilizer, the basic materials that businesses need, many of them derived from fossil fuels, are in short supply, helping push inflation to the highest level seen in decades. The underlying price spikes are helping make the cost of doing business more expensive for everything from taco trucks in San Francisco to shrimp boats in Louisiana, pressuring the small entrepreneurs that make up the overwhelming majority of U.S. businesses. We get to talk about small business today, Lance, and how high energy costs impact it. But before we dive in to these 5 examples, how they're each unique, what can be done about them, let's start with the word of the day.
It's a very menacious economy out there. Menacious is the word, 3 syllables, M-I-N-A-C-I-O-U-S. It is an adjective, which means you have to use it to describe another word, Justin. Menacious economy means menacing or threatening. We're going to do 5 vignette studies of small business people around the United States. So who goes first?
Yes. So the first one up is a beekeeper. So this gentleman fell in love with beekeeping about 8 years ago and decided to pursue his passion as a business. He sells honey, peach honey pops, honey lemonade, pea pollen, candles, and lip balm locally at farmers markets and shops, and also ships nationwide. He has grown to 26 beehives outside Atlanta and in the Georgia mountains. So we're talking Atlanta and Georgia, right? Mm-hmm. He hopes to expand to as many as 150 hives, but high fuel prices have led him to pause those plans. You might say, well, beekeeping and fuel prices? What?
Well, like he points out, he has all of those hives, but he doesn't have them on his property. He's has the bees where they will do the best, right? Where they will thrive and also produce the most honey. So he has to drive to his beehives all around. And then once he makes his products, he then has to deliver the products to all the different markets that he has, because he has, as a small business person, he has a niche economy, right? He has a very small area of people that he can sell to. So I'm sure he has to drive to different farmers markets around the different parts of Atlanta. And if you've ever been to Atlanta, folks, which I've had the privilege of visiting 4 or 5 times, wow, the road system there, everywhere. It takes you forever to go someplace. So, therein lies the problem, right? Is he has to collect all of his raw material and bring it back and manufacture it. And then he has to go out again and then deliver the finished products to the markets where he sells locally, as well as shipping. He said he shipped all over the United States, right? All over the world. So therefore shipping costs have gone up because for the people to pick up the packages and take them, their fuel prices have gone up. So they're probably charging him more to ship. So
he says he was spending $75 on gasoline every day. That's up from about $20 last year.
So triple.
Yes. Weekly deliveries of honey include 2 gallons to a restaurant and the bar at a historic theater, as well as 4 or 5 farmers markets in different areas of Atlanta. So he's got a lot of different places just he has to go to, right? Never mind anything like shipping or something like that.
And he's a young person, right? He's 32 years of age. He's trying to make his own way in the world, to start his own business. But he says to help offset gasoline prices,
he's thinking about serving tables or something like that.
He's going to take up a part-time job just to try to keep his main business going through this menacious economy that's going on out there.
Yeah, he also has to buy diesel for his tractor at more than $5 a gallon, which is up 62% from last year. He gave up a rented workspace and moved his office and bottling operations to his home's basement, saving on rent but causing a jump in electricity and water bills for his family of 4. So he said the money is just not flowing like it was last year. One thing that I do think, it depends on what position he's in, but he is spending a lot of money on gas. And I guess it would be, that's another one of those, we've had that conversation, right? I don't know how old his vehicle is or what he's driving around in, but
get that electric vehicle.
That's
is that
right.
What you're talking about?
Might be time for an upgrade here to, because if you're going within a certain mile radius, and it sounds like he's making a lot of regular deliveries, that's that area where the reason that companies like Amazon are looking at moving their fleets to electric too, they don't need them to go 1,000 miles. They need them to go 250, 500 miles in a day to make a set route of deliveries. And that's perfect. That's ideal. Far more efficient and more efficient in city. He's driving around Atlanta a lot. If you're doing a lot of that type of driving, you're going to be getting good returns as well.
Well, the only thing I'll end with is he started a business based on certain prices. And now those prices out of his control have doubled and tripled. And so now it's really putting a crimp in his business, because we're going to talk about some people who have been doing their business for a long time. In this case, when gas was $20, his cost was $20, he could make a profit. And then gas prices went up, which went up beyond his control. And so now he's struggling to make ends meet along with diesel fuel. So it also shows that if you're a small business and you make a plan based on the cost of doing business when you open, there's no guarantee that the cost of doing business will stay the same.
The next one up is the taco truck operator. For 33 years, this family has run a taco truck in San Francisco, and the son is about to take over from his father. But that excitement has found some temperament, because the total cost to run the truck is up as much as 50% over last year. The gentleman's 38 who's taking over. The truck and its generator run on gasoline, right? And propane powers the grill and steam table. All that fuel now costs more than $2,000 a month, up about 33% from the prior year. And that's only part of the business fuel-related expense. The owner also spends about $200 a week for the gas he needs for his daily drive, which is about 28 miles, to the taco truck's usual spot at a public parking lot in San Francisco. And then the other thing is, he's also got to go to suppliers to pick up all this food, right? And so he's got to drive to do that. And not just the driving is more expensive because of the fuel, but the ingredients themselves have gone up as much as 50% this year. So you're having to spend more because of the type of business you are, right? To go operate, you have to spend a good bit of money because you have to physically go set up somewhere, which costs you gas. Running your business takes propane, which you have to pay for. And then, of course, you also have to get all the ingredients, which is the actual food, the reason that people are showing up to your truck. And all of that has gone up in cost as well. And ultimately, what that has led to, right, is passing that cost on to the customers. For a type of Mexican sandwich, it's gone up to $11 from $10. For nachos, it's gone to $13.75 from $12.75. For energy drinks and Coca-Cola, to $3.50 from $3. And a side of avocado that used to go for 50 cents now costs $2. And he said, some of these customers have started to kind of poke fun at or, complain about having to pay more. But he said, what can you do? I'm having to pay more for everything. And I'm probably not even have raised prices as much as I would need to cover the total difference.
I was going to say that's not very much of a rise in prices compared to the inflation rate and gas prices and those kinds of things. And before those of you who listen to us in the Midwest fall out of your seats, or you run off the road if you're listening to us on the radio, remember he is outside of San Francisco. Because when I first read that article, I'm like, are you kidding me? $15 for a plate of nachos. But, San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. So those prices are very fair when you consider the cost of living in San Francisco and what you will make working in San Francisco. That's what, I've learned that with family out in California and looking for jobs, the pay is tremendous out there compared to what we make here in the Midwest, but rent is 2 to 3 times what we pay here in the Midwest, or housing costs.
Rent is also incredibly impressive,
as well as the gas prices. They're just talking almost $6 a gallon at the printing of this article, $5.76 a gallon. And, we never saw that here in Ohio, even when it was at its highest. So, the dollar a plate, the dollar a product seems like a lot, but I think he's really being fair to his customers. Probably why his customers are still showing up, because they're like, well, yeah, this is cheaper than I can go get a Big Mac, meal, or, run somewhere and spend gasoline myself. I can just walk out into the parking lot here and on a beautiful day in San Francisco, and yeah, it's worth it. Right. So, I think he's doing just about all he can to try to keep his business open, and is not trying to gouge his customers at all.
Well, and we've still got to talk about a few other types of businesses, right? A farmer, a shrimper, and a shopkeeper. How have they all been impacted? And as we're going through this, I'm challenging people to kind of keep track of are there any underlying themes that we're hearing about? And if so, what could be done about those things? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The corn farmer. Well, this is familiar to our neck of the woods, although the gentleman that we're going to be looking at, his name's Mark, and he's in Nebraska.
That is corn country, right? The Nebraska
yes.
Corn Huskers, name of the big university, right? In Mascot in Nebraska, the Corn Huskers.
One of the challenges with any farming, but particularly obviously if you're grain farming, which is what we're talking about here, is the monotonous nature of weather. It can wreak havoc on your crop, or it can help produce bumper yields.
We were talking off air about gambling, and it's always seemed to me that farming is like they're some of the biggest gamblers ever. And they maybe have never, stepped into a casino in their life because of the nature of their business. But man, because, you're complaining, well, it's too dry. And then you get rain and it's like, well, it's raining too much. It's like, whoa. I mean, it's worse than Goldilocks trying to be a farmer, because not only do you need moisture, right? But you need it at the right time in the right amounts to get the maximum harvest.
Well, and how does energy costs play? And I mean, obviously there's the immediate thinking, right, of probably, well, they got to fill their tractors with diesel, and that's going to cost money, and they got to run the trucks to get the grain, to actually sell it. So again, there's fuel. So fuel, of course, but what else might they do that requires fuel? Well, we were talking about rain, and if there isn't rain, what are some farmers going to do? Well, they're going to run their diesel-fueled irrigation pumps, right? He spent $52,000 on diesel, gasoline, and propane last year, and he projects that this year he'll spend $80,000 to $90,000.
Almost twice.
The increase in fuel prices over the past several months have sent the cost of food production soaring, and alongside it, the price of groceries. Chemicals, which derive in part from fossil fuels, including herbicides to control weeds and fungicides to control disease, are up 15 to 20% from last year. Fertilizer is also made from natural gas, which has galloped ahead of other costs. Ammonia, a source of nitrogen fertilizer, which is used heavily for corn production, was $1,425 a ton this spring, which was triple 2021's price. If Mr. Weber uses the same amount of ammonia as last year, it would cost $160,000, up from $54,000 last year. While his costs are rising, the value of his crops is up too, thanks in part to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has crimped the global supply of agricultural products.
That was going to be my one caveat there, and you stole it, but that is true. The one good thing for the farmer is that he's going to get more for his harvest because of the war in Ukraine. Again, not because of anything he's doing, right? I mean, he's trying to crimp prices, save on things as much as possible. But because, as we've talked on other shows about the ports in Ukraine being shut down by the Russian government and the amount of money that the Ukrainian farmers are losing, well, then obviously farmers in other parts of the world now reap the benefit. You like that? Reap the benefit of...
Hilarious.
All right. They're going to reap the benefits by higher prices for their products. Now, doesn't help us, the consumer, because all of our corn and wheat products are going to go up in price as well
global demand.
Global demand, but the farmers at least are going to get paid for their work. So that's a good thing, I think.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, and this is kind of how this section of the article ends, which I think is a good point, is the farmers are smart enough to know how long is this going to last, right? I mean, yes, everything's up, including what they sell the product for, but because of availability and other problems, profits aren't going to go up as much as they would have liked them to go up. And it's that question of this probably won't last forever, right? Not the least of which, by the way, which we've talked a lot about this, is the help that the agriculture industry needs in moving toward better sustainability of everything that it does. Because a lot of the industry is based on our ability to continue extracting product to put back into the earth so that we can keep growing things season after season. We've figured out ways to do that, but it's a question of how long can we sustain that? Because part of what they're talking about here, which I don't always think a lot of people understand, is, farmers have to do a lot of supplementing for their crops every year.
Because if you grow the same crop or same 2 or 3 crops in the soil year after year, it draws out the nutrients that those crops need.
Right.
And you say, well, yeah, you can rotate crops, but then the crops you have to rotate maybe aren't making the same amount of money. So, and you really can't grow it if you're going to have a profit loss.
Right.
So then you have to add the nitrates and the nutrients into the soil.
Yeah, it all has to do, right, with where we've arrived at, which was creating the highest efficiency possible to produce the most product as fast as possible. The world's appetite for beef has skyrocketed, and in turn, what do you need? Well, you need more cattle. Well, in order to finish cattle quickly and effectively and make them tasty, what do you need? You need corn, and you need a lot of corn, right? Now, cattle can eat a lot of things other than corn. They don't have to eat corn. And in fact, if they were wild cattle, they probably wouldn't eat very much corn at all, because they would be eating mostly grasses. But the point being, you increase demand for something like beef, and that has a trickle-down effect of saying, well, now we have to have more corn as well, right? Because you may be sitting there thinking, well, maybe I don't eat a lot of corn, do I? Well, you may not directly eat the corn, but the things you eat eats the corn. Do you like chicken? Because a lot of chickens also eat corn, right?
And a lot of
soybeans.
Breads and cereals and different things have corn or corn additives.
Correct. And if they don't have corn, they most likely have soy, of some kind. And so that's why those are major, the major growing crops. But the way, it used to be before you had all this advanced, right, ability to fertilize and add things back to the soil, is you had to rotate a wider range of crops. And farmers, maybe instead of rotating 2 crops, rotated 4 or 5 crops, all to ensure that you provided a certain, level of return of nutrients to the soil. And I guess the point in that is, without digressing, you're seeing that farmers are doing well because the cost of food is going up, but there's an instability to that only works for so long, because while we don't all necessarily, I guess, have to drive, we do all have to eat, right? And to get food from point A to point B, it has to be transported, and we have to pay for that. And so you've got this sort of tied-in cycle here of food prices are one of those that maybe even more so than gasoline affect whether or not people can go on living the type of life they want to live.
Who's next? We've been in Georgia, we've been in San Francisco, California, and we've been in Nebraska. Where are we going next?
Well, this one, the shrimper. Hurricane season is coming up, and a different kind of storm is on the horizon. It's fuel costs in Louisiana, as the shrimping business is spiking, just as Gulf Coast shrimp prices have cratered.
Ooh, not good.
So a recent influx.
That's a menacious combination.
Yes.
to have the cost to harvest the product go up, but have the price of the raw material go down. Whoo.
Yes, and part of that is a recent influx of cheap imported shrimp has depressed the price that Mr. Cooper receives for his catch at the docks. His large shrimp fetch, around $1.50 a pound, is down from $4 a pound last year. Some smaller shrimp bring just 30 cents a pound. Quote, every commodity in this country is going up and our shrimp are going down, said Mr. Cooper, a third-generation shrimper who works with his sons. The Coopers depart in the late afternoon, fish overnight when the shrimp are most active, and return the next morning. A good catch can be 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, worth $4,500 to $6,000. But some nights the catch might just be a few hundred pounds, not enough to even cover the fuel. At more than $5 a gallon for diesel, it costs $600 to $700 for the 120 to 130 gallons needed to operate each of his 3 boats for a night. Fuel prices just outweigh everything that we can possibly do right now, said Mr. Cooper, 62. He's president of the Louisiana Shrimp Association, and he had a heart attack on April 1st, which was his second. He said a lifetime of hard work on the water is catching up with him, but it's all he's ever done.
Well, that hits close to home because he's my age, and second heart attack, and yet he's still out there fishing every night with his sons. And his hope is that he can keep the business afloat long enough for his grandchildren, because he speaks of, he's the 3rd generation and he hopes that there's a 5th generation, his sons obviously being the 4th. But that's a really hard one, right? I mean, of all the stories, this is one where I don't necessarily have an answer, because you have to have the fuel to go out and catch the product. And the problem is the product prices are lower than they've been over the last few years. So, your level of profit margin has really gone down. Don't have a lot of answers for Mr. Cooper and his shrimp business, because I'll buy shrimp, and I'll try to keep, prop up the prices as much as I can.
Do you like shrimp?
Oh, I love shrimp. I like shrimp in any form or fashion.
Okay. All manner of shrimp.
Oh, all manner. Fresh, raw, fried, scalloped, you name it. I love shrimp.
Do you have a favorite form of shrimp?
No.
If you're at the restaurant and everything's on the menu, you get the sampler and just get one of each.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I really, really like, I grew up on fried shrimp, right? But when I got some money on my own, and I would go and I got the raw shrimp, and just, it's been peeled already for me.
Yes.
In there. That's like the cat's meow as far as taste. That's just like, so like in like a shrimp cocktail or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like the best stuff. Because if they can catch that much every night and they're clearing, top dollar and making $5,000 or $6,000 a night, then they're making it. But much like the farmers, I'm sure they're getting that once or twice a week. I had an old farmer tell me when I first moved here 38 years ago that they try to make money 1 out of every 3 years. And if they can make a decent profit once every 3rd year, they'll make it, because they'll make enough that they can weather the storm for 2. And it kind of sounds like it's the same thing in the shrimp business. If he can go out and, get 1 or 2 good catches a week, he can probably stay above water. But if not, I'm punny today. Did you get that? We're reaping.
I did.
He can keep the business afloat. He can stay above water. Folks, I'm winning prizes even though I'm not using Menacious. I think I get credit here for the extra credit.
Yes, you're lacking menacity, but you're bringing it in strong with the puns.
A lot of puns.
Let's talk about the last one here coming up, the aspiring shopkeeper. And then what do we do about any of this? Is there anything to be done? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Tammy bought a vacant 1890s-era general store in western New York State. She renovated the 4-bedroom upstairs apartment where she lives with her boyfriend, daughter, and 4 grandchildren. Next up were plans to reopen the downstairs storefront as a grocery and deli on Main Street in Pike, New York, about 50 miles southeast of Buffalo. But electricity bills have nearly tripled since she moved in, and she must overcome the higher cost of construction materials, as well as a bumpy few years of work. We can't get it open the way that I'd like. We just don't have the money to fix everything up and pay the electric bill, said Miss Ryan, whose highest winter bill went from $750 up to $750 from $280 in previous years.
That's amazing.
She is also catching up on $2,500 in overdue electric bills. She's 50 years old, worked in a real estate office before she purchased the building, and started a can redemption business to bring in some money while she worked to get the store open. People would drop off empty aluminum cans at the downstairs storefront and receive 5 cents a can. Miss Ryan, in turn, sold the cans for 8.5 cents and netted a few $100s a week. When COVID-19 led to lockdowns, people stopped bringing in cans and couldn't find another job because of the pandemic. By February, she owed more than $5,000 to local utility company. And when a worker showed up to shut off her power, Miss Ryan negotiated an extension. She canceled her family's internet service to cut monthly costs and is trying to avoid using much power. There's nothing running in our house, she said.
We've been coast to coast and we've been north to south and across the United States. And it sure sounds like people, small businesses all over the country are facing the same things. I mean, look at the positive things this woman's trying to do. She's taken an old storefront, an old building, turned it into a house and a business, right? I mean, refurbishing something that has been left to rot and trying to make it, instead of an eyesore, turning it into a place where people would want to come and re-energize this small town outside of Buffalo, New York. The spirit you have to love, because she's not giving up. You know, facing all of this, she with that $5,000 bill, the article talks about how she negotiated keeping the lights on and said, we'll pay this much, so they're out there trying to make it work, folks. I mean, that's why it's important in your towns and communities across this great country to support these small local businesses. You don't always have to go to Walmart, right? Or order it from Amazon. Support your local businesses, pay a little bit more, but keep them going because they are vital parts of your community. If they dry up, who's going to want to come to your town? You can go live anywhere and obviously have Amazon shipped to you pretty much, or have a Walmart. And not to bash the big companies, but there is a market for the small business entrepreneur, and it's what makes small towns in middle America go. And let's face it, they need our support if they're going to continue through these hard times. So think of that when you're about to make your next purchase. Is there somebody around the corner? Is there somebody in downtown in your small area that you could go to instead of going to Walmart and saving 30 cents on a bottle? Support the small businesses in your area. I think that's a vital thing to the United States.
Always important, but definitely right now.
So tell me, what are the common themes? You told our listener, I've got a couple, but let me see if mine match yours, and let's see if the audience if theirs match what you were saying. Because you said, what are some of the common themes?
Well, high energy cost is obviously the central theme of all of these, which is told to you in the title. So that one's pretty obvious. I think one thing that you're hearing throughout all of this, right? Everything pretty much except the shopkeeper at the end is fuel prices are impacting things.
Hers was electric.
And the extension of that is oil, right? In many cases, oil or natural gas prices ultimately are dictating everything that you heard throughout this, whether that's the oil that becomes gasoline, the oil that's being used to do oil changes in the boat or the tractors or the trucks or whatever it might be, right? Or the gas to run the truck, or the propane, right? Which is sort of similar to natural gas.
Or the byproducts of the fossil fuels for the nitrates and different things that are going into the farmer's field.
Right. I mean, so all of this goes back to fossil fuels are what's in common, right? However, I think it's important to point out, because there's a companion piece with this, Lance, that energy shocks aren't uncommon. Geopolitical turmoil, in particular, has often caused big jumps in prices. For example, after the Arab oil embargo in 1973 and the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
I remember both of those vividly.
But this episode is different in that higher prices are also being driven by changes in the structure of energy supply as countries try to cut carbon emissions, according to Tiffany Wilding, an economist at PIMCO. The low inflation of the prior decade was in part due to relatively cheap energy, buoyed by the shale revolution and intensified by the market share war among OPEC members in 2014 that flooded the market with oil. So one thing that's important is in recent history, we've had historically low energy prices overall due to a variety of contributing factors. In addition, you also now have this push to transition away from fossil fuels, especially because things like the war in Ukraine highlight the fragility of that market, right? The interdependence, for example, of Europe on Russia energy makes Europe nervous. And if Europe is less secure, then they're going to need to buy energy from somebody else, which does what? It drives the price for everybody else up. And that's why, for example, we face higher energy costs as a trickle down of that. It's not that there's, it's not that Europe or others like them are trying to be menacious. It's simply that they're facing a situation where they can't get it from who they got it from. So now they have to buy it someplace else. And that pushes up the demand for a supply that is basically steady. So what happens? Well, then the price goes up, right? Well, I mean, basically, I'm super oversimplifying, and if there's economists listening, they're going to, lay into me here for making this too simple. But I think that is the nuts and bolts of what's happening and how it, at the end of the day, trickles all the way down to, for example, what you pay for food or what you pay for any product, because it has to be made, it has to be manufactured, and then it has to be transported. And we did this episode recently, Lance, on cars, right? And talked about how many different parts go into, how many different suppliers touch a car, and you could be talking about somewhere between 18 and 30,000, different individual suppliers that come together to create a finished product. That's the complexity. That's a lot. And you think about, they all have shipping and manufacturing. They all have to spend fuel and energy in some way. So why does inflation and part of what we're seeing happen? Well, part of it is because the demand for energy is going up. We're not able to increase the supply as fast as the demand. And, so you end up with this terrible snowball effect of inflation starts to get ahead of itself, which is part of why I'm sure the Fed has signaled that they're going to be aggressive about trying to tamp down inflation. And
I think you'd agree with me, but I'll give you a few seconds here at the end to comment if you don't. Notice this is one thing we haven't mentioned: the politicians. This is the area where politicians usually take the biggest hit, right? Because as President Bill Clinton, former President Clinton, mentioned one time, it's the economy, stupid. If the economy's good, we're going to get reelected. If the economy's bad, we're going to lose. And we're having, a season coming up. But notice we haven't mentioned politicians because, in my opinion anyway, and I think Justin agrees, politicians get way too much credit when the economy's going well, and they get almost all, if not all, of the blame when it's going poorly. And we've talked about a lot of different problems today with inflation, and it really doesn't center around the actions of the politicians. And that's not to get you mad at us, folks, because you know that we usually rail against politicians for doing the wrong thing or not doing enough or not stepping in when they should. But this is just the economic cycle that we have under capitalism. This is what happens when we're interdependent on the rest of the world. And you might say, well, we need to do more at home. Well, there's just so much we can do and continue to grow. And that's just the reality of it. So, I understand we want to put the blame on somebody, but sometimes there's just not a whole lot of blame. It's just, this is what is, and this is what we have to deal with. And as the complimentary article said, this is part of the cycle, and it stinks to be living in this part of the cycle. But I'm old enough. I remember 1973 and the Arab oil embargo. I remember, folks, that's when we went down to 55 mile an hour speed limit and turning down your thermostat. You're like, whoa, 55? What do you mean 55 on the freeway? There's no way I'm going to drive 50. Yeah, we did. That's when it came about was 1973 to save because of the Arab oil embargo. And then I remember the spike in, they keep talking about inflation as bad as it's been for 40 years. Hey, do the math. That's back to the problems with Iran back in 1979 to 1983. This is the time period. Okay. I remember that. I was a high school student going into college when all of this was going on. So it is more so cyclical than it is political.
Well, and I think it's also inherent of any system that's based on the idea of extraction, right, is as susceptible to these shifts as we're seeing now, partly because it's based on your ability to continue to extract at a level necessary to meet the demand. And if you cannot, for any number of reasons, right, a war, lack of availability, lack of demand, whatever it might be, if you can no longer extract at the rate required to meet demand, or if demand outpaces the extraction, then you start to run into inflationary problems. And that's part of the nature of things. So, how do you fix it? Well, we've talked about, the new climate measure will certainly help in some ways, the Inflation Reduction Act, in terms of accelerating some of the investment into additional energy infrastructure. But our need for energy isn't going to decrease anytime soon. It's only going to increase. So it's not just as simple as saying transition existing power from fossil fuels into clean energy. That's a great start, but that's not enough. So continue to think about that as you think about, what do we need to advocate for? What are your politicians talking about? Are they really talking about the things that are going to make a difference or not? So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Because, here at True Chat, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I believe we've done that today, and hopefully you've learned something and you'll support your local small businesses. And if you're talking about this at home or at work and you have coworkers or family that say, well, that sounds like an interesting show, I'd like to listen to it, tell them. As a podcast, they can listen to us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
State of Us releases new podcast episodes Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. You can get those new episodes as a podcast, but they're also available on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the country. Who do you have for the win today, Lance, on Menacious?
I think it's close. I think I might have actually won, but I believe I'm going to argue here for extra credit for all the puns that I threw out there.
Where is that in the rules?
You might have pulled, it's not, but okay. Bradley is the keeper of the rules and he can do whatever he wants. And hopefully I made him grin 2 or 3 times with the puns. And so I'll get the win, but it was a close one today, but it was well played. Well played.
Today. If he was too locked in, he might have heard them and not really processed them. So he could have been in Bradley's zone and really focused and like, what? Oh,
plus it's old man humor and he doesn't always get that.
Well, there's that. There's also that. For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.